Yeah, so culture change and community justice is a reasonably systematic literature review that was developed initially for a group called the Performance Improvement Strategy Group, which was concerned within the Scottish Government to develop criminal justice social work services. That group's been superseded by the Government's Reducing Reoffending programme now, and that's the strand of work into which the report now feeds. The basic premise underlying the commissioning of the report was the view that evidence-based practice, or the development of a body of evidence about what might support resistance or what might reduce reoffending takes you so far with the development of practice. But even if you had, and I'm not sure that we do have, but even if you had a very clear set of evidence-based prescriptions for how practice should develop, you also have to understand the practitioners and the organisations that you're trying to develop. So it's not good enough to have, if you like, the good seed if you haven't attended to the condition of the soil. And this project, this literature review is basically about trying to look at the condition of the soil, in other words, to examine the professional, organisational, occupational cultures of community justice, with a particular emphasis on Scotland, but looking at evidence from other jurisdictions too. Some evidence, some of it quite diverse evidence, as much of it as we could focused in the community justice, corrections or probation field. We also prefaced it with a review of change, cultural change in the public sector more generally, before getting into the meat of the relatively few studies that we could find on cultural change in community justice. And then, having looked at that literature in depth, we moved on to try and analyse the very few available studies about the culture of criminal justice social work in Scotland. And the messages that emerged from the review are, I think, quite interesting. There are issues about, for example, the extent to which top-down models of implementation can deliver the results that they're after in terms of change within professional cultures and practices. A second strand relates to the importance of engaging with questions of values, professional values and ethics, because ultimately the extent to which practitioners sign up to the objectives of change programmes is a fundamentally important factor in the success of those efforts. And if either the change objectives are not clear, and that's clear in both a technical and a normative or moral sense, then the extent to which practitioners can connect to them is diminished. And thirdly, we need to understand why the culture of a professional group might be as it is. Most interesting for me in this connection, the culture of criminal justice social work in Scotland, we argue, suffers from a kind of double marginalisation. So criminal justice social workers inhabit a difficult space between social work and criminal justice, and according to some recent ethnographic research, they find themselves marginal to social work and marginal to criminal justice. And we speculate that that produces a kind of in-group identification which can have some quite conservative effects. So social workers learn, criminal justice social workers learn how to practice more from other criminal justice social workers to whom they are exposed than they do from professional education or from research or training. And it may be that strong in-group identification has some positive benefits in that it helps them to survive this difficult position that they occupy, gives them a clear sense of, the capacity to develop a sense of identity and to survive that tension. But on the other hand, it could be a brake on positive development, because in that system you get a reproduction of the same practices. If I learn from you and you learn from your predecessor, or learn from your predecessor, without much external influence being brought to bear, that could be delaying or impeding progressive developments. Interestingly, since we completed the review, I've come across some work from North America looking at the relationship between the adoption of evidence-based practices and the cultures and values of probation organisations over there. And in spite of the fact that the methodology is dramatically different, much more positivist, a very large scale and very systematic survey of correctional administrators in the States, the findings are similar. You have to look at the value positions and the dispositions or orientations of the correctional administrators and practitioners in order to understand the extent to which certain practices are and are not successfully adopted. The bigger implication of all of this, which I think is one that the Scottish Government has accepted, is that any reform programme has to make really serious efforts to try to engage with the professional constituencies to which it relates, and the failure to successfully engage those professionals in the debate about how the practices develop is fatal to the reform effort.
Thank you.